And we'll move on to thinking about how can we address some of those challenges of diversity? How do we get more people into the sector? So next up, I'm really delighted to introduce Dr. Anne-Marie Imafidon MBE, who's one of the co-founders of Stemettes. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you're doing, how your interesting career in the IT sector, working in investment banking, and then going on to found Stemettes is really going to help us learn how we can try and reach out to more people. Over to you, Anne-Marie.
Thank you very much, everyone, for having me here today. Really, really excited to share with you a journey of 10 years for me and the Stemettes organisation that kickstarted a while back. So a little bit about me. As you heard there in the beginning, I used to work in investment banking, so please don't boo me too much. Everyone makes bad decisions in their lives. I have always loved maths and technology since I was really, really young, and was really, really fortunate enough to have a unique childhood. I was one of these child prodigies that did things very, very young. I had 2 GCSEs by the time I was 10, had an A-level in computing by the time I was 11, and graduated from Oxford with my master's in maths and computer science by the time that I was 20. Now, for me, this was something that I went through and really, really thoroughly enjoyed. We've had the concept of curiosity already floated today. I was incredibly curious, but also really, really liked solving problems and that satisfaction of not just getting the right answer, but being able to trust a process to follow along with. What I didn't notice, though, that whole time was that I was a young Black girl engaging with these things. And it wasn't clear or apparent to me, actually, until I started my career, until I, in fact, actually ended up at a technology conference solely for women. There were 3,500 technical women in the same space that I thought, there's something I've been missing. Who knew that all this STEM stuff wasn't for girls? And so Stemettes is something that I created as a response to that, having noticed, having spotted that at least 10 years ago, as a woman in tech, as a woman in STEM, I was part of a shrinking minority, wanting to change that and reverse that. We've had a fantastic presentation just then about lots of people being motivated, lots of people having the inspiration perhaps to go into the industry, and this is wider STEM as well as space. But I think it's hard actually for us to ignore maybe half of the population, or just over half, depending on how you look at things, of the population when we consider the proficiency that we need, when we think about things like capacity, when we think about perspectives and experiences, and the fact that if we really have this skill shortage, we need to have as many people as possible with that right talent in, and that's not linked necessarily to their gender. And so over the last 10 years, I've worked on Stemettes. We've built a team of folks across the country, worked with more than 60,000 young women and young non-binary people, and they're aged, we start from 5 and go all the way up to 25. As we know, formative experiences are super, super important. We had a question earlier on arts from an artist who I don't know where they've moved to. Brilliant. Hey, artist. It's funny, you all look like artists, but that was the one that asked the question. And so for us, we've been able to focus on not just STEM, but bring and incorporate STEAM as part of our methodology, being science, technology, engineering, arts, and maths is incredibly critical actually to future-proof ourselves, what we're doing, and our workforce. For us, our theory of change is focused and centered on 5 measures that we have across every activity that we run, which is that of perception of STEM, awareness of options in STEM, a young person's network within STEM, and that's network with peers and with role models, their own confidence in their STEM abilities, and of course, knowledge with STEM. And as we know, no young person is an island. And so teachers, influencers, their peers, and others have all been a big part of our methodology. And so I know we're short on time. I promised that I'd do this in 10 words. It's 10 words plus a couple more that I'm going to go through. But in essence, as an organisation, there's quite a few things that we've learnt over the last 10 years across the work that we do. As we're trying to reach a certain community and underrepresented folks of these 2 genders, for us, it's been really, really important to ensure that we can be that one-stop shop and offer those opportunities no matter where they may be, no matter that means geographically, that means socioeconomically, that means also on their own personal journeys, because life is tough, actually, as a kid. I don't want to go back and be a teenage girl again, especially not at a time like now. And so for us, we've built up almost a pyramid of content platforms, inspirational content platforms, impactful short-term interventions at our events, and then longer-term intersectional cohorts. So I think the other thing we have to remember is that people aren't just their gender. If we think about protected characteristics and the way that we categorize ourselves, we're more than I'm a woman in addition to all these other things. And so we have to be sensitive about all of those and be inclusive on all of those things at the same time, because motivations, perceptions, experiences differ. Women are not a monolith, as the same way as men are not a monolith. And so we have to be sensitive to that. So there's 10 words that I wanted to present to explain a little bit about the nature of the impact and the methodology we've had over the last 10 years. And hopefully this will inspire some of you to perhaps think about how this might overlay with the work that you're doing, with the outreach that you're involved with, but also the opportunities that you create for folks to enter into the space sector. So the first 3 words are free, food, and fun. Free, fun, and food. Everything that we do is free, will always be free. It's always going to be fun, and there's always food, because people really like free food. I don't know how many of you are here, maybe not on the live stream here, but because of the free lunch, free food tastes better than food that you've paid for. For us, it was a really interesting concept to kind of bring to the fore, this idea that when we talk about STEM outreach, a lot of the times we focus on the knowledge, we focus on the hard things, we focus on what might have excited us. Whereas actually, if you're trying to convince somebody of something, if you're trying to engage them and bring them in, charging them for the privilege of being convinced of something probably isn't necessarily where you want to start. Ensuring that it's fun, and talking about fun and STEM is not something that a lot of folks actually get to associate. Many of us in the sector, of course, we know that STEM is fun, but actually outside, that's not really an association that people have. That's not necessarily the experiences that they remember. And so actually there's been a lot of value in giving people a STEM environment that is centered on fun, that has Justin Bieber or The Weeknd, or insert the name of whoever people are enjoying at the moment, and saying, actually, we can do these things. What is a banging space playlist that we can put together that we can all enjoy, getting on the CAD system and designing rockets or things to clean up space rubbish together with. The final thing is food. As I've said, everybody likes free food. The next 3 words have been creativity, altruism, and diversity. And again, these are ones that go missing quite often in the way that we portray what we're doing and portray the nature of STEM, and of course of space travel, of space work, of the space sector. We're all creating things. We want to be on another planet. We want to explore what's out there, and we have to creatively get together and solve problems. Again, when we think about STEM, a lot of it seems very formulaic, incredibly logical, and you have to recall facts and recall things that happened, rather than using that information as building blocks to create new things. And so for us, across all of our interventions and all that we run, the aim is creativity. It's not following a tutorial to create the same thing. It's how do we allow folks to do data visualization and build infographics on Build-A-Bear, Chelsea football team, and One Direction, all in the same event at the same time. And that's a real example that we've had from a group of girls that came along together. And then the third piece is diversity. And this isn't just, again, about gender. This is, again, across the protected characteristics, but also the diversity of options. And this is something that folks tend to not really know or understand. And we heard there a little bit in the previous presentation about just the idea of space lawyers, space artists, space chefs. There's a whole space sector that's coming. And so the idea that there's a diversity of options, a diversity of pathways, and a diversity of definitions of success is a really, really important one to consider, to reflect on, especially when you're engaging with a diverse audience into STEM, as we have done. The next 3, I hope we're all keeping track of how many out of 10 we're on, are academia, industry, and entrepreneurship. And I think for us, it's been really, really important to make sure that we bring all of those together as part of the engagements that we've been doing. There's something in there for everyone. And often, again, the image that we have is that you have to maybe work in academia to be a researcher, when actually you can do research in industry, or you have to work in entrepreneurship in order to create change and make something new, whereas you can be entrepreneurial in academia. And so allowing the young people to see, again, this diversity of options across the different sides of the fields, and getting folks to work together, but also getting people to value what each of these things brings to the table, which, let's be frank, let's be honest, we don't always necessarily do in our day-to-days. You know, sometimes we can look at academia in a particular way or look at entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship in a particular way, but allowing young people in their formative years to have a look at this, to understand this, and see where entrepreneurship might feed into the altruism, might feed into the creativity, as well as academia and industry, has been super important. But the final, and I think most important word of the 10 across the last 10 years has got to be equity. And I think this is something that, again, goes missing from the conversation quite often when we talk about access and we talk about having different types of people and bringing them into our talent pipeline, bringing them into our sector. There's a graphic here that I feel kind of explains this really, really well. Often they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I don't know if we have time for another 1,000 words, but when we look at what the reality is for so many people across the country, for so many young people, for so many of the young women and young people that we work with, the idea of saying that we want to have equality, or we're aiming for equality in the way that we run our programs, the way that we do our outreach, even necessarily the way that we run our recruitment rounds and the way that we do our promotions, doesn't quite make sense. We don't live in a vacuum. We don't live in something where everything has been perfect up until now. And so we have to recognize that there's a reality in differences of opportunities, in differences of motivations, in differences of challenges as well. And so having and employing an equitable approach to the way that we've done outreach has ensured that we've been able to do different things for different people to meet them where they are and therefore bring them on board. We explore this concept in depth as part of a 4-year practice research collaboration with the Institute of Education underneath Professor Louise Archer. I know many of you will probably recognise her name. But looking at this, we ended up working across a couple of STEM and informal STEM outreach organisations to come up with this, which is the Equity Compass. And this is a tool, this is a framework for ensuring that we've got equitable practice across the way that we run our STEM outreach and the way that we engage with young people as we're trying to bring them into our sector. You can see 8 axes across the compass. We've got here ideas of power dynamics, that of interests, and serving those who are underserved, rather than always focusing on those who are dominant, on having an asset-based approach rather than a deficit-based approach, which means that just because someone doesn't necessarily currently know their motivation for space, doesn't mean that there's not things that they bring to this conversation. They might be able to bring to an event, their own experiences, their own reflections on their life so far. Whether there's an orientation on a collective rather than just individuals, whether it's having centrality on major rather than tokenistic, and also the idea of participation not being done and programs not being done to the young people or even for young people, but being co-created and built with young people. And for us, this has shown its way in our youth board that we have that actually reports into our organisation and at a governance level. The final 2 are resources. So the idea of redistributing resources rather than reinforcing differences in resources that people bring to the table. And finally, taking a long-term view rather than a short-term view, which I think is probably the only part of the compass that has maybe kind of been part of discussions in outreach for an extended period of time. So that was a little bit from me on 10 years of Stemettes in 10 words. A little bit of a cheeky ask. Everyone's put them in towards the end of their presentation, so I thought I might as well too. It's 10 years done, 10 years to go, and then we are out. So if you'd like to be part of a finite change, one that will come to an end where we're not going to continually be trying to work on the same problem without making any progress, then there are a couple of ways to get engaged, get involved, and we'd love to have more folks from across the space sector engaging with us and maybe discovering 10 more words. So we've got a newsletter. You can collaborate with us as an organisation, providing time, space and funds. Donate. We are a registered charity, charity number 11887774. You can volunteer as an individual. Follow us across social media if it's still live and on at the moment. And also share the word and pass it along that we are the Stemettes and we're here to show that STEM is for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. And I think, one of the key things that we're doing here today is benefiting from this wealth of knowledge. You've got 10 years worth of experience. So rather than recreate the wheel, let's just share everybody's experiences. Let's see what we can do next, not work in a silo, but link to all of these different organisations. Right, we've got time for a question over here. The microphone to make sure that we can get that. But everybody online can hear. There is an opportunity to ask questions online if you want to as well.
My name is Jonathan Eastwood from Imperial College in London. This was a really, really great talk. I wanted to get your opinion on, you interact with so many young people in STEM generally. What would you sort of say their opinion of like what space is at the moment? Do they see it as really something not for them? How do they, think about Elon Musk or other examples? How do you think we're doing?
Gosh, you said the swear words. I think we heard it before, some of the attitudes on climate change. I think that there a lot of their reactions to it that, we ran a hackathon not too long ago, and it was on sustainability, and the number of projects that ended up focusing on space rubbish was actually quite telling. So I think there's definitely a sense that, there's no planet B. I think it's kind of a big theme that we see across a lot of it, but actually, why are we going to space? What problem are we solving by going to space? It looks like we're creating more problems. And for a lot of them, if we're feeding into that altruistic end of things, that's not, they want to kind of learn from the past and not do that again. So I think there's a big part of that that's coming up. I think the other thing is just there's a lack of awareness of the different options. And I think there is something we heard in the initial presentation of that idea of being an astronaut, or that idea of working on particular missions is it at the moment in terms of what things people think that they can do. And again, they either think that they're not smart enough or it's way too competitive, which would maybe be, I know it has to be a competitive process. Everyone can't go to space at the moment, but the idea of it being a huge competition and everyone every year is trying to make it, and it feels like X Factor, doesn't help to, it doesn't help with that idea of, no, there's spaces for everyone to do something. Not everyone is going to be an astronaut. So I think that's the other piece that's maybe missing, is the idea that you can do a lot of these things in space. There is a lot of space for you to do space things. And so it's not just that route of astronaut or working on a mission directly. As we said earlier as well, the awareness of what we have locally, what's going on here. Even the idea, many people have seen the response on social media to the ESA astronaut pics last week. And so many of the comments were, the UK is not in the EU, but it is in, all of that kind of nonsense. I think a lot of that's clouded the idea of what is even available. Is it just, like we said, that one NASA space that everyone can buy and wear? Or are there other organizations that are part of this space ecosystem? So I think there's a lot of things missing, but if we don't double down on the problems that we are solving in our pursuit of space itself, then we're going to continue to lose out on them. And it's things like, the microwave, having the microwave because of that, that things like that is what we need to be able to share, to say it's learning for us here on Earth, and it can provide and it can solve problems for us here on Earth. It's not purely about following Elon to the skies to go and create another population that has weird and wonderful rules and regulations that can come out at the drop of a hat every day because of his whims. I'm sure Elon's not watching this, so it doesn't matter what I say.
Thank you.
Right, I'm going to keep us moving on, but I think your answer there was about that diversity of opportunity that there is in the space sector, and we've got to get out and communicate that diversity piece and all those other options of diversity as well. I always think about diversity of thought and how we make sure we bring all those different people in, but I've got more opportunities to think about diversity now as well. Excellent, thank you very much indeed, Anne-Marie.